A fisherman found a bear drowning in a river. What happened next shocked the world. Have you ever heard a story so astonishing it seems torn from the pages of a dream? This tale begins on the rugged banks of Alaska's Kenai River, where a lone fisherman spotted a desperate shape thrashing in the frigid waters. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than debris carried by the river's current, but that speck turned out to be the hulking form of a drowning bear. One man's choice to risk everything for an unlikely creature would ripple far beyond the wilderness. What happened next would capture the world's heart and challenge our deepest notions of compassion. Jonas Redwood woke before the sun, an old habit formed by years of toiling in the brisk Alaskan mornings. The skies above the Kenai River were a swirl of steel gray and purplish blue, an endless canvas of early light. For Jonas, fishing was more than a job, it was a calling that flowed in his veins. His father had fished these waters, and his father before him. Jonas's earliest memory was balancing on the edge of a small wooden boat, rocking gently on waves, while his father's voice guided him on how to tie the perfect knot. On that particular morning, Jonas sensed something different in the air. He strapped on his thick waders, loaded his modest skiff with tackle and bait, and set off along the gravel path that led to the riverbank. The crisp scent of pine mingled with the tang of fresh water. "Far away," a loon cried, its haunting call reverberating through the stillness. Every snap of a twig and crackle of undergrowth was amplified in the hush. Jonas thought about his life, an aging fisherman living in a small cabin tucked away from the bustle of modern life. He wondered if there was more out there for him, more to discover, more to give. Standing on the shore, he inhaled deeply, letting the chill air charge his senses. Little did he know, the day's events would shift his entire perspective forever. Jonas pushed his skiff into the river, the gentle current lapping at the aluminum hull. The Kenai River was known for its salmon runs, yet on this day, the fish seemed to be the farthest thing from his mind. He couldn't shake an uneasy flutter in his chest, a restlessness that had him scanning the horizon for something he couldn't name. As he rowed deeper into a slightly narrower section of the river, he noticed a dark shape bobbing in the water. At first, Jonas assumed it was a large piece of driftwood, but driftwood didn't struggle or move like that. Heart pounding, Jonas rowed closer. To his astonishment, he made out the powerful limbs and dense fur of a brown bear, a creature that could be both majestic and terrifying. Yet here it was, flailing in the freezing current, clearly in peril. Something akin to panic surged through Jonas. This was no small animal. If it turned aggressive, he'd be in serious danger. But if he did nothing, the bear would most certainly drown. His father's words rang in his ears. In the wilderness, compassion is the line between surviving and truly living. With trembling hands, Jonas guided the boat nearer. He had to make a decision, turn back and save himself, or try to help a creature that could easily end his life if it felt threatened. He made his choice. Grabbing a rope he usually used to secure his boat, Jonas inched closer to the thrashing mass of fur. He called out, hoping his voice might somehow register above the roar of the water. But he knew the bear couldn't understand him. Still, in moments like these, words have a power beyond logic. They carry intention. Jonas's intention was clear. He wanted to save that bear. One would think that approaching a drowning bear is pure insanity. Even Jonas questioned his own judgment. The water churned violently around them, a swirling grey in the early light. The bear's eyes, wide and clouded with desperation, scanned the boat as it gasped for air. Jonas felt a bolt of fear, but even stronger was the pull of compassion. Leaning over the boat's edge, Jonas flung the rope in the bear's direction. He wasn't sure what he expected. Bears didn't have the dexterity or the learned behavior to grab ropes. But sometimes, in extreme situations, the line between human and wild can blur in unexpected ways. The bear pawed at the rope, missing it repeatedly. Jonas drew the rope back, coiled it again, and threw it out. This time, the bear somehow managed to hook its massive claws into the loop. Jonas realized the moment was critical. The boat rocked precariously as the bear instinctively tried to climb aboard, an impossible feat given its weight. If the bear got too close, Jonas could capsize and end up in the same predicament or worse. Straining with every muscle in his body, Jonas pulled on the rope, guiding the bear towards shallower water near the riverbank. The muscles in his arms burned, and his heart thundered in his chest. Was he really doing this? In a feat of raw determination, Jonas maneuvered the bear close to a gravel bar. Once the bear felt the riverbed beneath its hind legs, it collapsed onto the shore, heaving with exhaustion. Jonas, equally spent, stumbled out of his skiff. He kept his distance just in case. The bear lay there, sides rising and falling in rapid succession. It no longer looked like the fearsome apex predator he'd grown up learning to respect from afar. In that moment, it was vulnerable, dependent, and surprisingly relatable. Jonas stood several yards away, panting in the chill morning air. The boat's rope still dangled between him and the bear, a bizarre umbilical cord that had connected their fates. For a long moment, neither man nor beast moved. He wondered if the bear would recover quickly and turn on him, fueled by wild instincts and fear. Instead, it slowly lifted its head, water dripping from its sodden coat, and stared at Jonas as though trying to comprehend what had just transpired. The fisherman felt an unexpected surge of emotion. He'd always viewed bears with a kind of reverential caution. They were lords of the forest, untouchable and fearsome. Yet here was one that had been at death's door and now looked to him as if trying to express something beyond the capacity of language. Jonas reached into his boat and pulled out a small first aid kit. His logical mind told him that tending to a wild bear's wounds was reckless, but the pull in his heart was stronger. He wasn't sure what injuries the bear might have sustained. With careful, slow steps, he approached. Each time the bear shifted, Jonas's nerves spiked, but he pressed on. He dabbed at a cut on the bear's forelimb, bandaging it loosely. The bear rumbled a low sound, not quite a growl, but neither a sound of contentment. Perhaps it was the adrenaline, or perhaps it was that ephemeral bond forged in dire circumstances, but Jonas felt oddly calm. The sky above brightened as the sun finally peeked over the horizon. Its golden rays hit the river, sparkling against the water. Jonas realized he wasn't alone in the world in more ways than one. Never could he have imagined he'd spend his morning saving a bear, yet here he was, kneeling beside a creature far more powerful than himself. News travels fast in small communities, and the Kenai River region was no exception. By late afternoon, rumors began circulating. Jonas Redwood rescued a drowning bear. At the local tackle shop, hushed conversations swelled into excited chatter. The old fishermen who spent their days there shook their heads in disbelief or joked that Jonas had lost his mind. Others, however, found the story inspiring, a testament to the raw compassion that can appear in the most unforgiving settings. Annie Price, an amateur photographer, got wind of the tale and hurried to Jonas's modest cabin with her camera. She'd heard that Jonas had pulled the bear to shore, tended to its injuries, and then watched as it disappeared back into the forest. The entire event seemed too fantastical to believe without some visual proof. But when Annie arrived, Jonas was not in a mood to host visitors. He was still grappling with the emotional weight of what had happened. "No pictures," Jonas said quietly. "I just did what I had to do." Annie put her camera down, sensing the vulnerability beneath his stoic demeanor. "People need hope," she replied gently. "This story, what you did, it's remarkable." Jonas hesitated. For him, the incident was not about fame or recognition. It was an unexpected moment that challenged everything he thought he knew about living side by side with nature. Finally, he relented and let Annie take a few shots of the boat, the rope, and the bandages he'd used on the bear. Those pictures, though lacking a direct image of the rescued creature, would soon become a beacon for a story that was only just beginning to unfold. That night, Jonas had trouble sleeping. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the bear's frantic struggle in the water, but interspersed with that stark image were older memories, ones he'd kept buried deep. As a child, Jonas had once slipped off the bow of his father's boat while they were fishing for king salmon. The current had pulled him under, a suffocating darkness swallowing every sense. In that moment, all he recalled was the feeling of strong hands gripping his shoulders, lifting him back into the boat, and the warmth of his father's voice urging him to breathe. He remembered coughing up water, his chest burning, tears flooding his eyes as his father cradled him close. "You're safe," his father said, pressing a folded blanket around him. "You're okay." That memory was etched into his soul, a testament to how a single life can hang in the balance and be saved by the resolute kindness of another. Now, as Jonas tossed and turned in bed, the parallels were impossible to ignore. Was he simply repaying a debt, a cosmic circle of compassion that demanded to be closed? The images of the drowning bear had fused with the memory of his own near drowning, creating a tapestry of gratitude and empathy. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that saving the bear had less to do with daring and more to do with healing his own past. A few days after the rescue, Jonas started noticing strangers milling around the Kenai River. They came with cameras and smartphones, hoping to catch a glimpse of the miracle bear or the fisherman who had pulled off such a heroic feat. Some asked intrusive questions, wanting every detail of the rescue. Others conjured wild theories about Jonas having a preternatural connection to the wild. The quiet, introspective fisherman who had spent most of his life avoiding the limelight now found himself at the center of a local sensation. A reporter from Anchorage Daily News even made the trip to interview him. "Mr. Redwood," the reporter began, "your actions have sparked an outpouring of admiration. Could you tell us why you risked your life for a wild animal?" Jonas shifted uncomfortably, his gaze drifting toward the river. "I did what I hope anyone would do. Life is life. And sometimes you just don't question it, you act." The reporter scribbled in her notebook, eyes lit with curiosity. "You must have been terrified." Jonas nodded. It was intense. But fear wasn't going to save that bear. His words, humble though they were, resonated. The story soon made its way into local news segments. Then national outlets picked it up. Before he knew it, Jonas was inundated with requests, magazines, radio shows, even daytime talk shows. His phone didn't stop ringing. Each new request felt like a peeling away of the private shell he'd spent years building around himself. And yet, in the swirl of sudden fame, Jonas couldn't help but wonder what had become of the bear. A week passed, and Jonas found no trace of the bear he had saved. Part of him hoped never to see it again, for fear it might be suffering or wounded. Another part of him felt an urgent need to ensure the bear was all right. The local wildlife authorities told him that brown bears were resilient creatures, often bouncing back from injuries that would cripple lesser beings. However, Jonas's worry gnawed at him. On a crisp morning, just after dawn, he ventured out along the riverbank. He followed the path downstream to where dense foliage and smooth river rocks offered plenty of secluded spots for an animal to rest. Days earlier, fresh scars in the dirt or bent grass might have revealed the bear's path, but Alaska's wilderness heals quickly. The river current continued its eternal flow, indifferent to human concerns. Jonas spent hours combing through the undergrowth, scanning the mud for paw prints, listening for rustling branches or distant roars. He found nothing. Eventually, the sun climbed high, and Jonas accepted that he might never see the bear again. Disappointed, he resigned himself to the reality that sometimes an act of compassion has no tidy conclusion. Nature, for all its wonders, doesn't always tie up loose ends neatly. Still, Jonas felt a strange peace settle over him. He had acted in a moment of crisis, bridging the gap between man and beast. Whatever happened next, whatever fate had in store for that bear, was beyond his control. All he could do was cherish the brief, profound connection that had reminded him of his own humanity. While Jonas scoured the riverbank, the story of his rescue was going viral in the outside world. A local fisherman's act of bravery was the perfect anecdote for global audiences hungering for uplifting stories. Major news networks replayed interviews, social media lit up with discussions, and people across the planet found themselves deeply moved by a man who risked everything to save a wild creature. In a fast-paced world, often consumed by conflict and division, the story was like a splash of cold, clear water on a hot day, refreshing and vital. Children wrote letters to Jonas, detailing how the story inspired them to help animals in need. Wildlife conservation groups reached out, eager to partner with him on educational campaigns. Even government officials proposed awarding him a commendation for humanitarian or, more accurately, animalitarian service. Jonas was overwhelmed. Despite the fanfare, part of him resisted the sudden role of hero. He wasn't perfect. He lived alone, struggled with regrets about never starting a family, and often wrestled with financial hardships. Any fisherman in Alaska knows the precarious nature of the industry. Yet, the world's admiration shone a light on a part of him he hadn't realized still existed, a heart wide open to the wonders and woes of living things. One crisp afternoon, Jonas opened his mailbox to find a letter from a place he never expected, the Pilgrim Rehabilitation Center for Injured Wildlife, located near Seward. The letter read, "Dear Mr. Redwood, we have been following the story of your heroic act with great interest. A few days ago, we received an injured brown bear cub found alone near the Kenai River. We can't be certain it's the same bear you rescued. Bears are solitary, and mothers are fiercely protective. But this cub's injuries and location suggest a possible connection. We invite you to visit, as your presence might help us better understand what happened and how best to care for it." The letter was signed by Dr. Margaret Jew, head veterinarian at the center. Jonas's mind spun. He had rescued an adult bear, not a cub unless. Could it have been a smaller, yearling bear, or had it been part of a family group? The idea tugged at his heart. Questions flooded his thoughts. Where was the mother? Why had the cub ended up alone? Was this truly the same creature he had guided to shore? Driven by a mix of curiosity and concern, Jonas decided to make the trip. After all, if there was a chance that this was the bear he had saved, how could he ignore it? Pilgrim Rehabilitation Center sat on a sprawling tract of land, surrounded by towering spruce and fir trees. Jonas had never been to such a facility before. As he walked in, he observed pens and enclosures designed to mimic natural habitats, each containing different animals in various stages of recovery: bald eagles with bandaged wings, an orphaned moose calf hobbling on a splint, and foxes being treated for mange. The atmosphere was simultaneously heartbreaking and hopeful, a testament to human effort to mend what sometimes breaks in nature. Dr. Zhu greeted Jonas with a warm handshake. She was a petite woman with keen, dark eyes and a soothing voice. "Thank you for coming," she said. "We're not certain, but we suspect the bear we have might be connected to the one you rescued." Jonas felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "I'm not sure how I can help." Dr. Zhu led him down a corridor to a large enclosure. Inside, behind sturdy fencing, was a young brown bear, smaller than a full-grown adult but still large enough to command respect. It limped slightly, favoring its left hind leg. When the bear caught sight of Jonas, it let out a hesitant huff and retreated to a corner. Found him half submerged by the river, barely alive, Dr. Zhu explained. He's got some water in his lungs and a bad cut on his paw that was infected. We're treating him, but it's a long road ahead. She paused, studying Jonas. Could this be the one you helped? Jonas examined the bear from a distance, his mind racing back to that frantic moment on the water. The creature he rescued had seemed larger, but everything that day had been a blur. I'm not entirely sure. The bear I pulled was so distressed. Everything happened quickly. But maybe. The coloring looks similar, the build. Dr. Zhu offered him a gentle smile. Regardless, I want to thank you. Your story has brought a lot of attention to wildlife rehabilitation efforts. Funding, volunteers, they've been pouring in. Jonas nodded, a wave of conflicting emotions washing over him. If this was indeed the bear, how had it ended up here? Did it get separated from its mother? Guilt pricked at Jonas, wondering if his intervention had somehow disrupted the natural order. Yet, looking into the bear's eyes, he felt that same pull of compassion that had driven him to act on the riverbank. Life was precious, messy, and complicated. All one could do was try to help. Over the next few weeks, Jonas found himself returning to the Pilgrim Rehabilitation Center. He brought fresh fish, offered to help with maintenance, and even found himself learning about the complexities of rehabilitating wild animals. Dr. Zhu took him under her wing, explaining that while many animals recover and return to the wild, some never regain full autonomy. The bear cub, whom the staff tentatively named Kenai, after the river began to associate Jonas with food and gentle human presence. Though the aim was not to overly domesticate the animal, a certain level of trust needed to be established for treatment. Kenai's injuries healed, albeit slowly, and the staff remained guarded about the prospects of releasing him back into the wild. Bears that become too familiar with humans face significant challenges in reacclimating to their natural habitat. During one of his visits, Jonas found himself addressing a group of volunteers and donors. He felt out of place, a fisherman in a threadbare plaid jacket among business people, an activist sporting brand new hiking boots. But when he spoke, sincerity radiated from him. He recounted how he'd grown up by the Kenai River, fishing with his father. He described the moment he saw the bear drowning, a moment that changed his view of what it meant to coexist with nature. "There's a balance out here," Jonas said, voice quavering slightly with emotion. "Sometimes we hunt and fish to live, but we also have the power to protect. I'm no saint, but if my story can help one animal or one person realize we're all part of something bigger, then I'm grateful." The applause that followed was warm and genuine. Jonas felt an unfamiliar stirring in his chest, pride. Yes, but also belonging. For the first time in a long time, he felt connected to people, not just the river and the land. The impact of Jonas's words and actions stretched far beyond the rehabilitation center. Schools invited him to speak about conservation. Young children listened, rapt, as he described the wonder of seeing a bear in the wild and the terror of watching that same bear struggle to breathe. He never wanted to be a teacher or a role model, but somehow he'd become both. Local businesses donated to fund environmental cleanup projects along the Kenai River, inspired by Jonas's example. A national wildlife charity extended an invitation for him to participate in a televised fundraising campaign. The notion of appearing on television made Jonas break out in a cold sweat, but he recognized the opportunity to make a difference. As the story continued to spread, debates arose in various corners of social media. Should humans intervene in nature's processes? Some argued that wild animals should be left to their fate. Others maintained that compassion should not have boundaries, that saving an animal in distress was a moral imperative. Jonas, A man who had always navigated the murky waters of nature with caution found himself in the thick of an ethical debate he never anticipated. His response was nuanced. "I won't pretend to be an expert on the grand design of life. I just saw an animal suffering and tried to help. Maybe it's as simple as that." Despite the positive outcomes, Jonas's personal life remained in flux. His quiet days were now filled with speaking engagements, phone calls and emails from strangers. In the midst of all this, he received an unexpected visitor one afternoon. A tall, lean woman in her early 40s, with piercing green eyes, appeared on his doorstep. She introduced herself as Sarah Thompson, a documentary filmmaker from Seattle. "I've been covering human-animal interactions for over a decade," Sarah explained. "Your story is unique, and I'd love to film a documentary centered on the rescue and your ongoing involvement with Kenai." Jonas's immediate instinct was to decline. He'd been thrust into the spotlight more than he ever wanted. But Sarah was persistent, offering an empathetic ear and a vision for a documentary that wasn't just about sensationalizing a dramatic rescue. It would delve into the deeper connections people forge with the wild and how a single act can ignite global conversations. Over a cup of strong coffee, she asked him about his father, about the first time he'd ever seen a bear, about the trials and triumphs of living a life so entwined with Alaska's wilderness. Each question stirred memories Jonas had carefully tucked away. Before he knew it, he found himself sharing stories of nights spent around a crackling fire with his father, the sky shimmering with auroras and the paternal wisdom that shaped him. It was an unexpected catharsis. Sarah's camera wasn't rolling yet, but in that moment, Jonas sensed he might be ready to open up. Perhaps telling this story, truly telling, it could be his way of giving something back to the land that had given him so much and nearly taken him more than once. Life has a way of orchestrating events when least expected. A few days after meeting with Sarah, Jonas found himself back on the river, seeking a moment of solitude. Fishing had become secondary. He mostly wanted to feel the gentle sway of the current beneath his boat, to absorb the tranquility he once took for granted. Drifting along a quiet stretch, he spotted a brown silhouette at the water's edge. Instinct tightened his chest. Another bear. Jonas stopped rowing, letting the current carry him gently closer. The bear was sizable, likely an adult. It bent low, scooping salmon from the shallows, occasionally glancing up as if sensing his presence. In a moment that felt surreal, Jonas realized the bear was not alone. Behind it, a smaller figure, emerged another young bear, possibly a cub, albeit older than the one in the rehabilitation center. This was not Kenai, he told himself, because Kenai was still recuperating behind chain-link fences miles away. But seeing this family unit struck a chord. The mother bear guarded her offspring, teaching it how to fish, how to navigate the river. Jonas felt an ache in his soul, missing that sense of familial bond. He thought of his father's hands, once calloused and firm around the fishing line. The adult bear locked eyes with Jonas but didn't flee or charge. Perhaps it recognized no immediate threat. Jonas lowered his gaze, honoring the bear's space. Eventually, the mother bear resumed fishing while the cub awkwardly tried to mimic her movements. Jonas drifted by, silently offering respect. It was a reminder of nature's cyclical grace, of how life continues in countless forms, forging ahead despite the challenges. Within a month, Sarah Thompson returned with a small crew to begin filming. She wanted to capture Jonas's daily life, rising at dawn, checking his nets, preparing his gear. She interviewed locals, everyone from the bartender at the only pub in town to the staff at Pilgrim Rehabilitation Center. They spoke of Jonas's quiet kindness, how he'd never turned away a neighbor in need, how he'd once helped gather supplies during a harsh winter for a stranded family. Modesty can be a cloak people wear to hide their best attributes, Sarah remarked to her cameraman during a break. Jonas doesn't see himself as special, but that's precisely what makes his story resonate. When they filmed Jonas visiting Kenai, the bear now recognized him, albeit cautiously. Its injuries were healing, and Dr. Zhu mentioned a chance of eventual release back into the wild, though that outcome was still uncertain. Jonas felt a deep pang of hope. The documentary team captured the tenderness in his eyes as he observed the bear sniffing around, rummaging through its enclosure, occasionally glancing at Jonas as though acknowledging a strange, mutual history. "It feels good to see him healthy," Jonas said softly as the cameras rolled. "Even if he can't go back to the wild, he deserves a chance at a decent life." Fame, however, has consequences. Word of Jonas's role in saving a bear that had become an international symbol of man's compassion toward wildlife drew attention not only from admirers but also from those less inclined to celebrate. An official from the Alaskan Department of Fish and Game knocked on Jonas's door one evening. "Mr. Redwood," the official said, removing his cap politely, "we've received complaints. Some folks believe you interfered with wildlife in a dangerous way. They argue it sets a precedent for people to approach bears." Jonas felt his chest tighten. "I understand the concern. But what was I supposed to do? Let the bear drown? Look, we're not here to penalize you. In fact, many see you as a hero, but we have to address these concerns. We'd like you to help us develop guidelines for individuals who encounter wildlife emergencies." Jonas exhaled, relief mingling with apprehension. He didn't regret saving the bear, but the notion that people might try to replicate his actions without understanding the risks troubled him. He was no expert. He'd simply acted in the moment. Yet, if he could use his platform to educate others, help them avoid reckless decisions, maybe something good would come from this scrutiny. Amid the swirl of public attention and newfound responsibilities, Jonas's internal world remained in turmoil. His nights were plagued by dreams of swirling water, the bear's frantic eyes, and fleeting glimpses of his father's face. Each morning, he awoke to the deafening quiet of his modest cabin, loneliness pressing in like a cold, damp fog. One evening, after an especially long day of filming and meetings, Jonas looked through an old photo album. Pictures of him as a child flooded his mind, his father holding him aloft proudly after his first fish catch. A family trip to Anchorage. There was one photo of his mother, who had passed away before Jonas turned 10. She wore a gentle smile, eyes alight with love. Jonas realized the rescue had opened something inside him he'd kept locked away for years, a yearning for connection, for family, for a sense of belonging. Yet he remained alone, an observer of life rather than a participant. He picked up his phone and scrolled through the countless calls and messages he'd ignored from media outlets. Among them was a voice message from an old friend he'd lost contact with, a woman named Lydia, who had been a part of his life years ago. The message was brief and filled with concern. "Jonas, it's Lydia. I saw the news. Are you okay? I miss you." Jonas stared at the phone, emotions wrestling within him. Perhaps it was time to break free from the solitary existence he'd accepted as his fate. The next day, Jonas finally returned Lydia's call. They agreed to meet at a small cafe in town. She arrived wearing a thick parka and a colorful scarf, her eyes as bright as he remembered. They embraced awkwardly at first, neither quite knowing how to break the tension built up over years of silence. Over steaming mugs of coffee, Lydia spoke of her life. Since they'd last seen each other, she'd moved to Juneau, worked for a non-profit, and recently relocated back to the Kenai area to be closer to family. She praised Jonas's courage, her tone tinged with gentle reproach for not having reached out to her sooner. "I always knew you had a big heart, Jonas, but I never expected you to become a figure of national news." She smiled, eyes shining. Jonas shrugged. "Neither did I. It's overwhelming, honestly." Lydia placed her hand over his. "You've been carrying a lot on your own." Let me help if I can. Her touch, her concern Jonas hadn't felt such warmth in years. In that moment, he understood that the rescue was just the beginning of a deeper journey, one that involved not only bridging gaps between man and nature, but also bridging the gaps in his own life. As autumn transitioned to winter, the Kenai River region became a tableau of ice and muted sunlight. Fishing slowed, and Jonas found more time to spend at the rehabilitation center. Kenai, now stronger, was being slowly prepared for a trial release in a controlled environment, a large fenced reserve where the bear could test its instincts without fully returning to the wild just yet. Jonas joined the wildlife experts on several outings to observe Kenai's behavior in a semi-natural habitat. The camera crew followed, capturing the bear's tentative sniffs at fresh snow, its attempts to dig for roots, and the exhilarating moment when it tried chasing a squirrel still clumsy but growing bolder each day. Late one afternoon, while the sun dipped behind frosted evergreens, Dr. Zhu pulled Jonas aside. "We may never know if this is the exact bear you rescued, but he's come so far. We couldn't have done it without you, Jonas, without your initial act of compassion and your ongoing dedication." Jonas felt tears threaten to spill. "I just can't bear the thought of an animal suffering. If there's something I can do to help." Dr. Zhu gave him a warm smile. "You've helped Kenai, and you've inspired people around the world. Remember that." The documentary, tentatively titled A River Between Us, premiered online in early December. Sarah Thompson's artful storytelling highlighted not just Jonas's rescue of the bear, but also the broader tapestry of life along the Kenai River. Viewers saw the local fisherman who spoke candidly about the delicate balance between harvesting salmon and preserving ecosystems. They witnessed the staff at Pilgrim Rehabilitation Center working tirelessly to nurse injured wildlife back to health. And at the heart of the documentary was Jonas' reluctant hero, humble fisherman, and newfound advocate. The film quickly gained traction, prompting international interest. Emails and messages poured in from viewers in Europe, Asia, and beyond, some sharing personal stories of animal rescues, others simply expressing gratitude for the reminder that compassion can trump fear. A community group in Japan, moved by the story, organized a river cleanup to remove debris that posed dangers to local wildlife. In Brazil, students held a fundraiser to support their local animal rehabilitation center. The ripples Jonas had sent into the world's waters were now waves, breaking on distant shores. With winter tightening its icy grip, Jonas spent Christmas at the local church, a rare appearance for someone who generally worshipped only at the altar of nature. Lydia joined him, her presence a comforting reminder that life could hold second chances. After the service, they walked through the snowy streets, lit by festive lights. "It's been a whirlwind year," Lydia said, slipping her gloved hand into his. "You saved a bear, became an unwitting celebrity, and you're stirring hearts around the globe. How are you holding up?" Jonas exhaled a breath visible in the frosty air. "I feel hopeful, tired but hopeful. For a long time, I thought I was just a fisherman, following in my father's footsteps. Now I see there's more I can do, more I want to do." Lydia's smile was soft. "I always believed in you. I'm just glad you're starting to believe in yourself too." Their footprints trailed behind them, fresh marks in newly fallen snow, symbolic of a future they might forge together, uncertain, but full of promise. As the new year began, a decision loomed. Kenai was showing signs of readiness for full release back into the wild. Dr. Zhu and her team were divided. Some felt Kenai was still too accustomed to human contact, while others believed he could adapt if given enough space and minimal human interference. Jonas was torn. Part of him wanted the bear to roam free, living the life nature intended. Another part worried that Kenai having grown somewhat trusting of humans, might wander too close to campsites or towns, leading to conflicts that often ended tragically for the bear. Yet, Jonas believed in the resilience of wild creatures. If Kenai could survive near drowning and recover from his injuries, perhaps he could survive the wild, provided people gave him the respect and distance he deserved. After much debate, the team decided to attempt a soft release. They would equip Kenai with a GPS collar to monitor his movements. A remote area far from human settlements was chosen, a place teeming with fish and sheltering forests. Jonas asked to be there, a silent witness to the moment Kenai returned to the life he'd nearly lost. The day of Kenai's release was bright and cold, the sky a pale blue. Jonas rode in a truck alongside Dr. Ju, who kept one eye on Kenai through a narrow slit in the metal cage. The bear appeared calm, though now and then it let out short, anxious huffs. Upon arriving at a secluded stretch of wilderness, the team placed the cage in a clearing. Cameras were set up at a respectful distance, the latch clicked and the door swung open. For a long moment Kenai remained inside, uncertain. Then, with a burst of courage, he bounded out, stopping briefly to look around as though disoriented by the sudden expanse of freedom. Jonas stood transfixed. Kenai lifted his muzzle, sniffing the air, then took cautious steps deeper into the forest. Jonas's breath caught as the bear vanished between the trees. It was as if a chapter of his own life had quietly ended. Dr. Zhu placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "He's got a chance, thanks to you." Jonas nodded, words failing him. Part of his heart went with Kenai into those woods. He silently prayed the bear would thrive, that the wild would receive him as it once had. For the second time, he stood witness to Kenai's brush with destiny, first at death's door, now at the threshold of a new life. The sense of awe and the lingering sadness filled Jonas with a deeper understanding of what it meant to love something enough to let it go. Life doesn't pause for profound moments to sink in. Soon after Kenai's release, Jonas was contacted by a conservation group that wanted him to speak at conferences around the country. They believed his humble background and genuine passion could galvanize support for wildlife preservation. Still uneasy about public speaking, Jonas debated whether to accept. Lydia encouraged him, reminding him that the world needed voices like his, honest, grounded, and unpolished by corporate agendas. He finally agreed to a series of speaking engagements, which sent him to places he'd never dreamed of visiting, bustling cities where towers of steel replaced forests of spruce, and rivers were often channelized or hidden behind concrete walls. Everywhere he went, crowds greeted him with warmth and curiosity. Jonas felt like an ambassador from another realm, a traveler from a land where nature's heartbeat was tangible, reminding these urban dwellers of a world less touched by civilization. In these new environments, Jonas also saw ways to connect. He shared stories of salmon runs and aurora borealis nights, forging bridges between city-bound children and a wilderness they might never see firsthand. He realized that the only way to preserve what is wild is to make people care, and to make people care, you have to show them the wonder. Months passed like clouds scudding across the sky. Yet, Jonas never truly left the Kenai River in his heart. He wrote letters and made phone calls to keep tabs on Kenai's GPS coordinates. The bear had roamed widely, venturing across valleys and ridges, skirting the fringes of human habitation, but never lingering long. By all accounts, Kenai was surviving well. On a foggy dawn, Jonas returned home to his cabin, exhausted from a whirlwind tour. The place looked the same: sturdy log walls, a porch sagging slightly under the weight of time. But Jonas felt different, as if he'd gained new eyes through which to see the world. The inside felt cozier now, less like a refuge from the world and more like the cradle of memories and possibilities. Lydia arrived that evening with groceries and a warm smile. "Welcome home, traveler," she teased, setting a pot of chili on the stove. They talked for hours about his experiences in far-flung cities, the hundreds of faces, the heartfelt conversations. And through it all, the steady hum of connection, two people who'd once drifted apart, now growing closer than ever. Not long after Jonas settled back in, word spread of an unusually large brown bear frequenting a specific bend of the Kenai River. Some locals speculated it was Kenai, now robust and confident. Others dismissed the possibility, noting bears come and go, especially when fish are abundant. Yet the rumors piqued Jonas's curiosity. He ventured out one day, accompanied by Lydia, each carrying binoculars and a quiet hope. For hours, they meandered along the banks, the melodious sound of the river weaving through the hush of the trees. Then they saw it, a lone brown bear, powerful in build, turning stones to snatch at hidden salmon eggs or crustaceans. Jonas lifted his binoculars, heart pounding. The bear's coat shone a rich, healthy brown. Could it be? Then the bear turned slightly, revealing a glint of metal at its neck. The GPS collar. Emotions surged through Jonas. He motioned for Lydia to remain still. Their vantage point was a high slope, offering a clear line of sight without disturbing the bear. Kenai. After all this time, the bear had returned to a place so deeply woven into Jonas's identity. Relief, joy, and a strange sense of kinship overwhelmed him. The bear meandered along the banks, occasionally snorting at the water, oblivious to its observers. Eventually, it disappeared around a bend, leaving Jonas and Lydia in stunned silence. He turned to her, a tear glistening in his eye. He made it. He's really back. The fisherman and the bear had come full circle, each changed by the currents of circumstance. Jonas Redwood realized that the once drowning animal was not the only life rescued that day. In saving the bear, he'd set in motion events that ultimately saved himself, drawing him out of solitude, rekindling old relationships, and offering him a renewed sense of purpose. He didn't chase after Kenai that afternoon. Some lines are meant to be cast, and some are meant to be reeled in, but others are best left slack, allowing life's mysteries to unfold at their own pace. Jonas respected the bear's right to be free, to live a life unburdened by human expectation. If fate saw fit for their paths to cross again, it would be on nature's terms. When spring finally broke the icy hold of winter, the Kenai River flowed with renewed vigor. Salmon migrated upstream, and the forests vibrated with bird calls. Jonas returned to his regular fishing routine, though he balanced it with his speaking engagements and volunteer work. He no longer fished solely for income. He did it for tradition, for communion with the wild. Lydia often joined him. They shared laughter, stories of the past, and musings about a future that no longer seemed as lonely or uncertain. The local community, once flabbergasted by Jonas's rescue of a bear, now embraced him as a humble spokesman for coexistence with nature. As more time passed, Jonas came to learn how deeply his story had permeated global consciousness. Conservation initiatives bore his name, children wrote essays about him for school, and tourists arrived, hoping to see the bear savior, as some dubbed him. The moniker embarrassed Jonas, but if it led to even one more animal being spared suffering, or one more child dreaming of protecting the wild, he would bear that burden. People from many walks of life, farmers, city dwellers, politicians, activists, came together in discussions sparked by a single event, a fisherman finding a bear drowning in a river. They debated, collaborated, disagreed, and sometimes compromised, but they did so with a heightened sense of empathy and awareness. No story is without its darker notes. Poachers, emboldened by rumors of large bears in the region, sometimes tested the boundaries of protected areas, and the complexities of human-wildlife conflict never vanished entirely. But Jonas's voice and the awareness he'd kindled served as a counterbalance. Each challenge prompted more rigorous protections, more community patrols, more unified efforts to preserve Alaska's wild heritage. Jonas remembered his father's words, "If you love something, you fight for it." And that's exactly what he did, day after day, conversation after conversation, act after act of dedicated stewardship. Time flowed on, as rivers do, seasons cycled, bringing new life, storms, and calm spells. Jonas aged into his 60s, but his spirit remained vibrant. Lydia became more than a companion, she became family. They married in a simple ceremony by the Kenai River, the water that had shaped both their lives gurgling happily in the background. Only close friends and a few curious onlookers witnessed their vows. Instead of wedding rings, they each placed a river stone in the other's hand, a symbolic gesture of grounding each other in life's ever-shifting current. Kenai remained a presence in Jonas's life, albeit a distant one. The GPS collar eventually transmitted its final signal, either damaged or dislodged. Wildlife cameras sporadically captured images of a healthy, robust brown bear roaming far from human dwellings. Jonas took solace in those rare glimpses. The bear was free, living as it was meant to, reminding him that some gifts are best appreciated from afar. In his later years, Jonas devoted much of his time to mentoring the youth who visited the river. He taught them how to fish responsibly, how to read the subtle changes in the water's movement, how to respect every living creature they encountered. His beard, graying at the edges, lent him the aura of a sage. The children listened wide-eyed to stories of the drowning bear, the rescue, and how the world watched in awe. One breezy afternoon, a young boy asked, "Were you scared when you saw the bear drowning?" Jonas nodded, remembering the surge of terror. Fear is natural. It keeps us alive. But compassion is what makes life worth living. The years carried Jonas gently forward. His rescue of the bear became a legend, passed down in fireside tales and classroom lessons. He never believed himself a legend, just a man who answered a call he couldn't ignore. Yet the ripples of his action had indeed shocked the world, prompting countless others to rediscover their own capacity for kindness. One late summer day, Jonas found himself alone by the river once more. The setting sun painted the sky in soft hues of rose and gold. He remembered the day he had rowed out, unsuspecting, to find a bear in desperate need. He smiled, thinking about the improbable bond formed in those moments. The fisherman had saved the bear, and in doing so, saved a part of himself he hadn't even realized was lost. Jonas tossed a pebble into the water and watched the ripples expand outward. Life was like that one act, spreading far beyond its origin, touching distant shores in ways no one could predict. That was how compassion worked, how love worked, how growth worked. And as the sun sank low, Jonas Redwood, fisherman of the Kenai River, closed his eyes in silent thanks for all the beauty and pain, loss and gain that had shaped his incredible journey. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey of a humble fisherman and a drowning bear, a story that began as a moment of sheer compassion and blossomed into a global movement. We've witnessed how a single action can ripple through countless lives, uniting communities, inspiring children, and reminding us all that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism come from the simplest choices of the heart. If this tale of resilience, connection, and personal growth moved you, please like this video, share it far and wide, and consider subscribing to the channel. By spreading stories of hope and empathy, you become part of the ripple effect, touching hearts in ways you might never see. Thank you for watching. And remember, each of us holds the power to save and be saved, sometimes by a single, astonishing act of kindness.